My brother Grover mocked me right in front of his whole family. He tapped his fork on his glass, smirked, and said, "Clifton, you're almost 60 and still drifting through life. No partner, no family beside you. Just you and your empty house." His words rolled across the table like a cold wind. A few of his teenage grandkids giggled. His wife Dara didn't even hide her grin. Even my nephew Ira glanced at me with that pitying look that hurts more than an insult. I felt heat climb up my neck. The same heat I used to feel as a kid when Grover pushed me in front of neighbors and called it a joke. Age doesn't make the humiliation softer, it just makes you less willing to swallow it. I stared at the scratches on Grover's fancy table and finally exhaled the truth I'd held too long. Subscribe. Hit the like button. And tell me in the comments how old you are and where you're from. For you, it's just a small thing, but for me, it's the reason I keep telling these stories. They blinked, thinking I was rambling again, talking to ghosts in the room. Then I looked Grover straight in the eye. "Tell me, brother, where's all your great success? Because if we're being honest, I've carried you for half your life and I only stopped today." The laughter choked off instantly. Forks froze. Even the dog under the table stopped moving, as if he sensed something shift. None of them knew that what I carried in my jacket pocket would tear apart every lie Grover built his life on. Grover's face tightened the way it always does when he's caught off guard, like someone just tugged a string behind his ear. His family stared, waiting for him to snap back with one of his clever little insults. But he didn't. He just opened his mouth, closed it again, and shifted in his chair as if the cushion had suddenly turned into a cactus. Dara reached over and patted his arm, whispering, "Honey, don't let him get to you," which only made him stiffen even more. She always thinks whispering makes her quiet. It doesn't. She whispers like a malfunctioning kettle. I watched them scramble, and something strange happened inside me, a mixture of anger, satisfaction, and a tiny spark of comedy. Because the truth is, when Grover gets embarrassed, he does this thing where he rubs his neck in circles, faster and faster, until he looks like he's trying to start himself like an old lawnmower. I shouldn't have found it funny, but 60-year-old men laugh at weird things, especially when the alternative is crying. "Clifton," he finally muttered, "let's not make a scene." "A scene?" I raised a brow. "Grover, you served one with dessert." Dara gasped a little too dramatically, knocking over her tiny cup of decaf. She scrambled for napkins, but her bracelet kept getting stuck on the table runner. The more she tried to fix the spill, the more she spread it. It would have been comical if the tension wasn't so tight it could snap the chandelier chain. I leaned back, suddenly aware of how quiet the room was. Even the family's old parrot in the hallway, who normally squawks "hello" every 5 minutes, had gone silent. Maybe he sensed the shift, or maybe he was just asleep. That bird has my napping schedule. Grover cleared his throat. "You're twisting things, Clifton. You weren't carrying me, you were helping. Brothers help each other." "Sure," I said, "but only one of us remembers it." That did it. His oldest grandson, Lucien, looked between us like he'd just discovered we weren't characters in the perfect family painting Grover always hung above himself. The boy opened his mouth and asked carefully, "Grandpa, what does he mean?" Grover shot me a warning glance, the kind he used to give when we were boys digging in the neighbor's garden. Back then, it meant, "Don't you dare." But I was 60 now, and I'd dared enough times in my life to know the world doesn't crack open just because you tell the truth. I reached into my jacket slowly, feeling the envelope's stiff edge under my fingers. And just as I touched it, Dara whispered, "Grover, is that what I think it is?" Judging by the way his face drained, I wasn't the only one who knew this night was far from over. The moment Dara whispered that question, Grover shot her a look so sharp you'd think she'd just confessed to hiding a body in the freezer. His jaw clenched, his temples pulsed, and for the first time all evening, he looked genuinely afraid. Not annoyed, not embarrassed, afraid. And let me tell you, seeing my loudmouth brother suddenly turn pale felt like watching a bear slip on a kitchen rug. Strange, unexpected, and oddly satisfying. "What envelope?" Lucien asked, leaning forward like he was about to witness a magic trick. Kids love drama, especially when it isn't theirs. Grover slammed his palm on the table. "Lucian, stay out of this." The poor boy jumped so hard his chair squeaked across the floor. The sound was so shrill and awkward I had to press my lips together not to laugh. I swear, that chair screamed like it had opinions. Dara, shaking, tried to pour herself more coffee to calm down, but her hand wasn't cooperating. She missed the cup entirely and created a perfect brown puddle on Grover's favorite placemat. I watched her dab at it while muttering, "Oh goodness, oh gracious," in a loop like a wind-up toy running out of batteries. Grover leaned toward me, his voice low and sharp. "Clifton, if you brought that thing here, you're making the biggest mistake of your life." I raised an eyebrow. "At 60. Grover, my biggest mistake was trusting you with anything more valuable than my lawn rake." A couple of the grandkids snorted. Even Dara's mouth twitched into a nervous half-smile. Grover shot me a glare that said he wished he could throw me out the window, but the man's back isn't what it used to be. He once threw his shoulder out, opening a jar of pickles. Violently, it was heroic and pathetic at the same time. I tapped the envelope in my pocket. "You know, Grover, secrets age even worse than we do." He swallowed hard. I could see the sweat forming on his forehead. That's when Lucian, the oldest grandson, quietly stood up and said something no one expected. "Grandpa, if there's something we should know, we want to hear it." Grover froze. His fork slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table, echoing through the dining room like a dropped gavel. And that's when I realized it wasn't just Grover who feared what was inside the envelope. His whole family did. Lucian's question hung in the air like slow-falling dust, and for a moment no one breathed. Grover stared at his grandson, stunned that the boy dared to step out of the perfect, obedient family portrait he liked to keep them in. The man always hated surprises except when they were about him. Then he'd throw himself birthday parties 3 days early, just so he could accidentally walk in on everyone yelling his name. I rested my palms on the table, feeling the polished wood, warm from the plates and the tension. "Maybe they should hear it," I said. "They're old enough to understand what kind of man you've really been." Dara shook her head so fiercely, her earrings clinked like wind chimes. "Clifton, please, the children don't need." But she didn't finish, because at that moment, the family's old parrot in the hallway suddenly woke up and shouted, with perfect timing, "Tell them." I nearly choked. I'd spent years being interrupted by that bird, but this might have been his greatest performance. The kids burst into startled laughter, and even Lucian cracked a grin. Grover, however, turned the color of week-old oatmeal. He pushed back his chair so abruptly, it scraped the floor in a long, painful squeal that made my teeth itch. "Enough," he snapped. "Clifton, you're twisting everything. That envelope, it's nothing but old nonsense. Ancient business. Just paperwork. It doesn't matter anymore." "Funny thing," I said. "About things that don't matter, you're sweating like you're about to give a eulogy." I didn't plan to be cruel, but the words just came, like they'd been waiting 40 years to escape. Age gives you permission to say what you should have said decades earlier. Grover pointed a shaky finger at me. "You think you're some kind of hero? You think dragging up the past makes you better?" "No," I said. "It just makes things true." Maeve, the quietest granddaughter, the one who always carries around a notebook like she's documenting the fall of civilization, looked at me with wide eyes. "Uncle Clifton, what's in the envelope?" I pulled it out slowly, letting them see the worn edges, the faded corners. The room held its breath. Even the parrot whispered a confused little hello, as if he sensed the shift. I set the envelope on the table and tapped it with one finger. "This," I said, "is the reason Grover never talks about the year he disappeared for 6 months." Gasps rippled across the table. Grover lurched forward, knocking over his water glass right into his own lap. He shot to his feet, drenched, sputtering, and for the first time in his life utterly speechless. And that was the moment every member of his family realized the legend of Grover, they'd been fed all their lives, was about to come crashing down. Grover stood there dripping water onto the rug, his shirt clinging to him like a panicked jellyfish. And for a second I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He kept wiping at his pants, muttering, "For heaven's sake, this is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous." As if blaming the water would somehow dry it faster. Dara rushed to help him, but she slipped on the spilled puddle and bumped right into him, sending both of them wobbling like two uncoordinated penguins. The grandkids tried not to laugh, but a few snorts escaped. Even I cracked a smile. What can I say? 60-year-old knees may creak, but our sense of humor survives everything. Grover finally steadied himself and jabbed a shaky finger at the envelope. "Clifton, don't you dare." His voice wasn't loud, no, it was small. And that's what startled everyone more than anything. Grover didn't do small. He was born loud and lived louder. I pressed my hand on the envelope. "I didn't bring this to shame you. I brought it because I'm tired of living under a story you wrote." Lucian nodded slowly. "Grandpa, you always said you were traveling that year. For work." Grover stiffened. "And I was." "No, you weren't," I said. "And it's time they knew what actually happened." The room shifted again. The kids leaned in. Dara took a seat, folding her hands like she was bracing for turbulence. Even the dog wandered over and sat by my feet, which I chose to interpret as moral support, though honestly he might have just smelled the roast chicken on my sleeve. Grover swallowed hard. "Clifton, don't do this. You don't understand the consequences." "Oh, I understand them perfectly," I said. "You're the one who forgot consequences don't disappear just because you shout them." He ran a hand over his soaked shirt, sighing like the weight of 60 years had suddenly fallen onto his shoulders. "They don't need to hear about that." I tilted my head. "If that didn't matter, you would have told them yourself." Maeve raised her little notebook. "Should I write this down?" Grover nearly fainted. "No." The poor girl jumped so high, her pen flew out of her hand and landed in the mashed potatoes. She stared at it, horrified, while the parrot in the hall started laughing, actually laughing like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire feathered life. I slid the envelope closer to me. The paper crackled softly. "Grover," I said, quieter now. "You built your whole life on a story where you were the strong one, and I was the spare part. But what's inside this shows who was really holding things together." His lips trembled. "Please, Clifton, don't." And for the first time in our lives, my brother looked at me not with superiority, not with irritation, but with fear-awe, human fear, which only made me more certain that opening that envelope would change everything in this family. I didn't open the envelope yet. I just let it sit there in the center of the table, like a sleeping snake, wrapped in old yellowed paper. The whole family stared at it, as if it might suddenly grow legs and run across the plates. Grover sank back into his chair, still damp, his hair sticking up in strange directions. He looked less like the self-proclaimed patriarch he always pretended to be, and more like a man who'd just escaped a car wash on foot. "Clifton," he said quietly, "you don't know what you're about to ruin." That made me chuckle, because in our family, whenever someone says ruin, what they really mean is tell the truth. "I'm 60, Grover," I replied. "At this age, the only thing I ruin is my back tying my shoes too fast." I reached for my glasses and realized I'd put them down, somewhere. I patted my pockets, checked the chair, even looked under the playstand, of course. The whole table watched me like they were witnessing a wildlife documentary. Then Ira pointed to my head. "They're on you, Uncle Clifton." And sure enough, there they were, resting perfectly crooked on my hair, like a crown made for a forgetful king. The grandkids giggled, and even Lucian cracked a smile. I adjusted them, trying to look dignified, which is nearly impossible when your glasses have spent the last 5 minutes perched on your scalp. Grover leaned forward, hands clasped. "That year, I was trying to protect the family." Dara frowned. "By disappearing?" He ran a hand over his face. "It wasn't disappearing." "Really?" I said. "Because I recall Mom calling me every night crying, and you sent one postcard with a picture of a cactus and the words, 'Doing fine.' The parrot in the hallway squawked, 'Doing fine, doing fine,' like he was mocking him. Honestly, I'll never know how that bird keeps perfect comedic timing. The grandkids looked at each other, curious, confused, and maybe for the first time questioning the man they grew up idolizing. Lucien, calm but steady, asked, "Grandpa, why didn't you ever tell us what happened?" Grover's eyes darted to the envelope, then to me, then back to his family. "Because some things are better left buried. Buried things have a way of smelling," I said, "especially after decades." He winced, really winced, like the words physically hit him, and for a split second, I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. Real, trembling shame. "Clifton," he whispered, "if you open that, everything I built will come crashing down." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the truth was already unraveling, thread by thread, right in front of them. They weren't looking at the envelope anymore, they were looking at him. And for the first time in his life, Grover had no script, no spotlight, no story to hide behind. And we were only getting started. I could feel the energy in the room tightening, like all the oxygen was leaning toward the envelope. Grover kept rubbing his hands together, not for warmth, but like he was trying to erase fingerprints from his own past. Dara shifted uneasily beside him, glancing at the grandkids as if she hoped one of them would suddenly announce it was bedtime and drag everyone away from the unfolding disaster. I tapped the envelope lightly. "You know, Grover, you always said you were the pillar of this family." He nodded weakly. "Well," I added, "pillars don't usually vanish for half a year without warning, unless they're the kind that hold up a shed, and a raccoon sneezes too hard." A couple of the grandkids burst into muffled laughter. Even Dara bit back a smile before remembering she was supposed to be horrified. Grover slouched lower. "Clifton, stop turning this into a spectacle." I shrugged. "You made it a spectacle the moment you invited an audience. The truth is, spite wasn't driving, might was exhaustion. 40 years of being painted as the unreliable older brother, while Grover strutted around as if responsibility were his middle name. Meanwhile, his middle name is Benton, which already sounds like a man who would claim credit for planting a tree he only walked past once. Lucien leaned closer. "Uncle Clifton, what actually happened that year?" I breathed in slowly. My heart beat harder, not from nerves, but from the memory of that winter, decades ago. "I didn't want to be the one to tell you. Your grandfather should have." Grover buried his face in his hands, mumbling something that sounded suspiciously like, "Oh no, no, no." I pushed my chair back, intending to stand dramatically, except my knee decided to betray me. It cracked so loudly it echoed through the room like someone snapping a frozen twig. I let out a very undignified oof, and immediately grabbed the table for support. The grandkids stared. "I meant to do that," I said. They didn't buy it. Not even for a second. Once I was upright and reasonably stable, I placed both hands on the table. "Your grandfather," I began, "didn't travel for work. He didn't volunteer overseas. He didn't study, or consult, or whatever story he told each of you." Grover shook his head violently. "Clifton, stop." But the words were already leaving my mouth. He vanished because he was drowning in debt. And while he hid, I was the one paying every bill that threatened to swallow this family whole. Gasps shot through the room like tiny lightning bolts, but I wasn't finished. "And that envelope," I pointed at it, "contains the proof, receipts, letters, overdue notices, bank statements he begged me to keep secret." Grover slammed a fist on the table, but it wasn't forceful, it was desperate. "You don't understand. If they see those, then," I said softly, "they finally see me too." He froze, because he knew I was right, and the room, his room, the room built on his stories, was no longer on his side. The room didn't erupt, it collapsed into silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful, but the kind that buzzes in your ears, like the moment after you drop a plate and wait for someone to yell. The grandkids sank back into their chairs, wide-eyed. Dara clutched her necklace as if it were a seatbelt during turbulence. And Grover, he just stared at me, blinking rapidly, the way he used to blink when our mother asked which one of us borrowed her car without permission. "Debt?" Lucien finally said. "Grandpa, you always said you were the one helping everyone else." Grover opened his mouth, but nothing came out except a weak puff of air, like an old accordion wheezing its last note. I decided to lighten the blow just slightly. Helping? I chuckled. Your grandpa helped by disappearing so thoroughly I thought he'd joined a monastery. I half expected a postcard of him wearing robes and watering a bonsai. That earned a few nervous laughs. Even Maeve cracked a grin before quickly hiding it behind her notebook. Grover rubbed his forehead. Clifton, those were complicated times. Grover, I said, that year was so complicated even I started losing my hair and I wasn't the one hiding in a motel under the name Mr. Carter. Lucian's jaw dropped. Dara's eyes doubled in size. Ira nearly knocked over his plate. Grover squeezed his eyes shut. You promised you'd never bring that up. And you, I replied, promised you'd pay me back. One of us kept our word. The parrot in the hallway chose that exact moment to yell, Pay up. I swear that bird has a degree in dramatic timing. I reached for the envelope again. My fingers shook not from fear, but from the weight of what I'd carried alone for decades. All these years, I said, you told everyone I was the unreliable one, the drifter, the bachelor who never settled down. Meanwhile, I was keeping your whole life from sliding into the river. Grover's eyes glistened. He looked older than 60 older than I'd ever seen him. Clifton, you don't know what you're doing. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. For once in our lives, the truth is going to sit in the middle, not under the rug. Maeve tugged Lucian's sleeve. Should we open it? Grover lurched forward. No. He reached out so fast his chair wobbled, and he nearly toppled into the dip platter. He caught himself at the last second, but his hand landed squarely in a bowl of coleslaw. The slap of his palm hitting cold cabbage was so dramatic that half the table jumped. Grover froze, coleslaw dripping from his fingers like some tragic salad waterfall. Grover, I said gently, you've been slipping for years. Tonight just makes it obvious. The grandkids really watched him for the first time. Not as the hero, not as the loud storyteller, but as a man who'd been hiding behind others' sacrifice. And the envelope sat there, untouched. Glowing with the weight of the truth about to break open, Grover slowly pulled his hand out of the coleslaw bowl, cabbage clinging to him like wilted confetti after a very sad parade. The poor man looked at his fingers as if hoping gravity would show mercy and dropped the evidence to the floor. No such luck. A long strand slid down his wrist, and I had to pinch my lips together to keep from laughing. 60 or not, I'm only human. Dara rushed over with a stack of napkins too. Many napkins, honestly. Looked like she ripped out half the roll and started wiping his arm with the frantic energy of someone washing a crime scene. Grover, honestly, you're making a mess. I'm making a mess, he muttered. Clifton's the one. I raised a hand. Don't blame me for your coleslaw bath. My hands were in my pockets the whole time. One of the grandkids whispered, This is better than TV. Which, frankly, I took as a compliment. Grover slumped down, defeated, as Dara plucked a stray carrot from his shirt pocket. He looked around the table, searching the faces of the people who used to laugh at his jokes, clap at his stories, and nod along to his bragging. They weren't doing that now. They were waiting quiet, tense, leaning in as if listening for a distant train. His voice cracked. Clifton, you never understood what I was dealing with. I made mistakes, but I tried to fix them. I sat back. You didn't try to fix them. You tried to bury them. I was the one fixing while you were hiding. Lucian stepped closer to me, his eyes sharp but sad. Uncle Clifton, why didn't you ever tell us? Because your grandfather asked me not to, I said, and for a long time, I thought protecting him was protecting all of you. Grover lowered his head. His shoulders sagged, and the fight drained out of him. Like someone had pulled a plug. I'd never seen him like that, not even when we were kids, and he got caught sneaking out through the window, claiming he was checking the weather. I wasn't brave, Grover whispered. I was terrified. Every day. I didn't know how to dig myself out. And you, he looked at me with watery eyes. You kept covering for me, even when I didn't deserve it. Something stung behind my ribs. It wasn't triumph. It was something heavier. You didn't deserve it, I said softly. But I did it anyway, because we're brothers. The tension in the room thickened. Not angry now, but fragile, like a thread stretched too tight. The grandkids exchanged glances, the younger ones inching closer to Grover, unsure where they fit in this new version of him. Maeve finally whispered, "Are you going to open it, Uncle Clifton?" I looked at the envelope, at its worn creases and faded ink, at the ghost of the past sitting right there on the table. I rested my fingers on it. The paper felt thinner than I remembered, maybe because I'd carried it too long. "I will," I said, "but not because I want to hurt him." Grover lifted his eyes. "I'll open it," I continued, "because it's time this family knew exactly who held it together all those years." Every gaze locked onto me. Even the parrot stayed silent. I slid my thumb under the flap, and just as the paper began to tear, Grover whispered a single word. Wait. Grover's wait wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. It was the kind of word a man uses when something inside him finally breaks, not out of anger, but out of honesty long overdue. My thumb paused against the envelope. The room held still. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Grover pushed himself up from his chair slowly, wiping the last of the coleslaw from his sleeve with a kind of defeated dignity that almost made me smile. He wasn't the loud storyteller now, not the family hero, not the man who mocked me in front of everyone. He looked like the younger brother I remembered from childhood, the one who used to hide behind me when storms came. "Clifton," he said softly, "don't open it. Let me say it myself." I lowered the envelope to the table. Grover took a shaky breath, then turned to his family, those faces that once adored him, and now waited for truth like it might change their entire lineage. "That year I traveled," he began. "I wasn't brave. I wasn't successful. I was drowning. I'd made stupid choices, greedy ones, and instead of facing them, I ran." His voice cracked, but he continued. "Your Uncle Clifton, he paid my bills. He saved our house. He kept everything from falling apart. Not me." Dara covered her mouth, tears slipping down. Lucien looked stunned. Maeve scribbled something in her notebook, then wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Grover kept going, voice trembling. I let him take the blame for being irresponsible, while I took the praise for being the strong one. And tonight, when I mocked him, I wasn't laughing at him. I was trying to bury the guilt I've carried for decades. His lips shook. "I'm sorry, Clifton. I'm so damn sorry." The apology wasn't dramatic. It wasn't polished. It wasn't loud. It was real raw, painful, and clumsy in the way only long-held regrets can be. I felt something loosen in my chest, something I'd carried almost as long as that envelope. I sat down, my knees grateful for the mercy, and looked at my brother, not the legend he tried to be, but the flawed man he truly was. "I never wanted you humiliated," I said quietly. "I just wanted you to stop pretending I never mattered." Grover nodded, tears running freely now. "You mattered more." Than he stepped forward and placed his hand over mine on the envelope. "Burn it," he whispered. "I don't want my grandkids remembering me by what you carried for me. I want them remembering who I'm trying to be now." For the first time that night, the room exhaled. Dara reached for his arm. The grandkids surrounded him like he was fragile glass. Even the parrot let out a soft, approving hello, as if blessing this awkward family miracle. I stood up slowly, carefully, and slipped the envelope back into my jacket. "Fine," I said, "but only on one condition." Grover sniffed. "Anything. You stop calling me alone or useless. I'm 60, not invisible." A laugh rippled around the table. Grover even managed a weak smile. "You're not alone, Clifton," he said. "You never were." I shook my head with a grin. "Well, I am invisible sometimes. I once talked to your dog for 10 minutes before realizing he wasn't listening." That finally broke the tension completely. Laughter rolled through the room, warm, real, relieved. I walked toward the door, slipping on my coat, my back cracking in about 3 different unflattering ways. "Don't worry," I said. I meant to make that sound dramatic. And as I left the house, I didn't feel like the shadow brother anymore. I felt like a man who finally reclaimed his name, his dignity, and his place in the story. Grover didn't win that night, And I didn't win either. The truth won. And sometimes, that's the victory old men like